Hello ladies and gents, it's Jake here, and throughout the many installments in the Batman Arkham games, there has been a plethora of DLC stories that add to the overall narrative of the series. Some of them are great, some of them are terrible, and a lot of them are just okay. In this video, I'm going to be ranking all of the DLC stories in the Arkham series from worst to best. Now my ranking isn't the right ranking, it's just my opinion and I would love to see yours. Before we get started, I want to mention that I'll be considering each of the most wanted missions from the Season of Infamy expansion as separate installments. With all that said, let's begin. Starting off in last place, I have the GCPD Lockdown. This is also known as Nightwing's Arkham episode, and there's a lot of issues that I have with this. But before I get to that, what do I like about this DLC? Well, playing as Nightwing again is certainly fun, as he's one of my favorite DC characters, and this DLC actually released before the updates came out to where you could play as all of the characters in challenge maps, so this was really the only convenient way for you to play as the character. Also, I will give this DLC credit, as it's really the only time in the entire Arkham series that you get to see what Gotham City looks like during the daytime, and the new GCPD Predator map that's introduced with this DLC is a very nice addition, and it's by far the largest Predator map in an Arkham game. Also, it's pretty cool to see that Nightwing can utilize fear takedowns in this DLC, just like Batman could in the main game. Unfortunately, these small good aspects don't save this DLC from being in last place, as the narrative surrounding Nightwing and Penguin is extremely bare bones and doesn't really feature any character development. This DLC also follows the same formula as most of the Arkham episodes of just being a 1-2-3 combat Predator combat scenario, and then you're done with it in around 25 minutes. I was really looking forward to this DLC before it came out, but was sadly left feeling very disappointed. Next up, I have Wonderland. This is the Mad Hatter Season of Infamy mission, and there really isn't much to this mission overall. The first half that involves rescuing the GCPD officers isn't anything special, but the climax of the mission where you're fighting in a storybook version of locations from the previous Arkham games was a really cool idea. As for Mad Hatter himself, he wasn't written amazingly by any means, but the writers did a good job of portraying him as a psychotic villain that you as the player really wanted to see defeated. Although I mentioned that the earlier section where you're saving the officers wasn't anything special, it did have its good moments, such as tracking the cars by listening for their sirens, as well as the small twist where the third officer isn't in the trunk once you open it. However, I will say that the controls for disarming the bombs on the police cars are a little clunky and not the easiest to get a handle on. Overall, I think this mission does have its good moments, but it's easily the worst of the Season of Infamy missions. Then I have a flip of the coin. This is Robin's Arkham episode, and while it follows the same formula as a few of the other Arkham episodes, there are some things that I enjoy about it. With Two-Face being the main antagonist of this story, this DLC introduces new maps and environments that are unique to him, and aside from the visual aesthetics, the maps introduced are pretty fun to play in. Additionally, there's a little bit of character development for Tim Drake as he struggles with Batman's absence and learns to stand on his own as Robin. On the other hand, I really don't like Robin's interactions with Oracle in this story, as I'm not a fan of the romance between Tim Drake and Barbara Gordon whatsoever. Additionally, Robin doesn't really have an interesting rivalry with Two-Face in this story, as they had zero interactions in the main game for this story to build off of. I have a good enough time with this DLC, but it's far from my favorite. Up next I have Catwoman's Revenge, and as the title suggests, this is Catwoman's Arkham episode. Now this DLC is certainly better than the other Arkham episodes we've gone over so far, but it does have its problems. On one side, the story builds off the rivalry established between Catwoman and Riddler in the main game, and the characters' actions make sense, and the banter between the two characters over the course of the story is pretty entertaining. Additionally, the combat and predator maps in this area are all directly connected, making it seem like more of a complete environment. I also like the environment of the toy shop and how it's given a nice Riddler aesthetic. On the other hand, this DLC introduces one of my least favorite combat maps in the franchise, that being Destruction Line, which has this extremely annoying gimmick of the floor becoming progressively more covered in electricity, therefore giving you hardly any room to work with, and sometimes you can just auto-target an enemy that sends you into the electricity, and that is very annoying. I like this Arkham episode, and it was definitely the best of the later ones, but it's far from the best overall. As we move into the top 10, I have In From the Cold. This is the Mr. Freeze Season of Infamy mission, and I really like this mission from a narrative standpoint. Mr. Freeze is one of the most consistently well-written characters in the entire Arkham series, and it was interesting to see a different side of the character where there's still a conflict with Batman, but at the end of the day, Batman and Freeze aren't really enemies here. The interactions between Mr. Freeze and Nora are really emotional and well written, and the fact that we're finally able to see the connection between these two is great, because all we've had to go on is the knowledge of the comic counterparts and the one-sided perspective from Mr. Freeze in Arkham City and Arkham Origins. From a gameplay standpoint, I love the opening Predator map on this mission that puts you on an ice-covered ship out in the middle of the water, which not only looks great visually, but I think it's one of the best structured Predator maps in the series. The gameplay in the middle of the mission isn't anything special per se, but it's not bad either. However, I really don't like the final gameplay section in this DLC, as it's just another battle against a bunch of tanks, and Arkham Knight had way too many of these to begin with. I will admit that fighting these tanks alongside Mr. Freeze was a little bit cool, pun intended, but the final gameplay section left a lot to be desired, and if not for that, this DLC might have been a couple places higher. Next at number 9, still on the Season of Infamy, I've got Beneath the Surface, which is the Killer Croc mission. There's a lot about this mission that I really enjoy. The horror elements of Killer Croc in this mission work really well, just like they did in Arkham Asylum. The new environment with the Iron Heights prison airship was also a very nice inclusion, which not only gave us a new environment to explore, but also fleshed out the wider DC universe of this continuity. This mission also showcased a more sympathetic side to Waylon Jones that we hadn't really seen before, and it was really well written to the point where you actually felt sympathy for him, and ended up hating the Wardens so much more. Also, the inclusion of Nightwing in this mission was definitely fun, if not a little bit random. I remember the original rumor that Red Hood was going to appear in this mission as the dual play partner, and as much as I love Nightwing, I would have loved to have seen how Red Hood would have worked as a dual play partner in this game. I will say though, that I really don't like Killer Croc's design here. It looks absolutely terrible. Also, the final boss at the end is fine, but nothing too special. While this mission does have a lot of good aspects, there are a few flaws that bring it down. Then I've got the Initiation from Arkham Origins, and this is probably a lot higher than most of you would have it on your perspective list. I love that we get to see Bruce Wayne in his pre-Batman days as he trains with the League of Assassins or League of Shadows, whatever works for you. This DLC has a lot of well-designed environments, and I love the League aesthetic that comes with it. The inclusion of Shiva in this DLC was also a nice touch, as it sheds some light on the organization that she's hinted to work for in the main game, even though Bruce Wayne himself isn't that exciting as a playable character, since he's very similar to other playable characters in this franchise. Although, I do really love his masked ninja costume. The cutscenes that are placed in between each map are also really well done and set the stakes for each scenario very nicely. The music that plays over each of these maps is also really good and fits the tone very well. While this DLC isn't my favorite, I do have fun playing through it every once in a while. Up next I have the Harley Quinn Story Pack from Arkham Knight. This DLC finally allows the player to take control of Harley Quinn, and in doing so turns her into unarguably the most unique playable character in the Arkham series. Harley is a blast to play as in combat, and her limited playstyle in Predator maps provides a fun challenge. A small detail that I really like with Harley's gameplay is when you go into Psychosis mode, which serves as Harley's version of Detective mode, you can see various phrases written on the walls and hear faint voices inside Harley's head. I like how this story acts as a prequel to set up some of the events that take place at the start of Arkham Knight, and we actually get to see a little bit of Bloodhaven here too, which is pretty cool. Granted, we don't really get to explore the city and we're just limited to the police department, but hey, at least it's something. I don't really like the final boss against Nightwing though, as not only do I think it's completely ridiculous that Harley should be able to beat Nightwing, but the boss itself isn't exactly special in terms of gameplay either, I guess other than the fact that you're fighting a hero. This DLC isn't one that I replay very often, but I still think it's a fun time. Just outside the top 5, I have the Red Hood Story Pack. Now before you pick up your pitchforks, just hear me out, as I bet most of you have this a lot higher on your list. Just because it's at number 6 doesn't mean I dislike it. I love the gameplay elements that Red Hood brings to the table, from his visceral combat, brutal takedowns, cool gadgets, and an overall very menacing presence. Even though his gadgets are limited, I still think they're pretty fun to use, especially the twin pistols. However, the story here is pretty much non-existent. You just go from combat map to a predator map to the final fight against Black Mask and his goons, and the game just cuts to black before thrusting you into a different area. On top of that, Red Hood and Black Mask have no interesting rivalry at all in this universe, and there's no connection between them in the slightest in this game. Red Hood's edgy dialogue is definitely fun to listen to, and he's a pretty awesome character in this DLC, but it's so quick that you don't really have as much time to enjoy the character as you'd want, and then all you have left to enjoy the character with are the AR challenges. This DLC is certainly very fun, but I was hoping for a little bit more from it. As we move into the top 5, I have Harley Quinn's Revenge. Now some of you might have this a little lower, but I think this DLC is a little underrated. I like how this story is a direct follow-up from the Joker's death in Arkham City, and we get to see the perspective of these events from other characters like Oracle and Robin, and how these events have affected main characters like Harley and Batman, although the latter a little less so. I like how this story opens with Robin searching for Batman, and we get little teases of Harley's current mental state. The dockyard environment that's brought in with this DLC is fine, but it doesn't exactly stand out, aside from the pretty cool memorial to Joker that doubles as a prison for Batman. I like how the story transitions to Batman's perspective about a quarter of the way through, and then allows the player to fill in the gaps as we get to the point where we left off. Once we're given control of Robin again, we get a Predator boss against Harley and her goons, which is certainly derivative of the Catwoman Predator boss against Two-Face, but it's still pretty fun, and there's also an added challenge here by throwing in the cops that act as potential hostages. During our final combat encounter as Robin, we get a unique twist on an opponent, and that amongst Harley's thugs, which are uniquely designed to set them apart from Joker's, we get a Harley thug who's injected with Titan, and while it wasn't necessarily groundbreaking as we'd seen it in the main game before, it was still a cool twist. Once we switch back to Batman for the final section, we're given a time limit to disarm all of Harley's bombs, which are given unique passwords all tied to the death of the Joker, and then while the final combat encounter isn't amazing, with the Wonder City robots feeling especially out of place, despite the fact that they're all painted to look like Joker, the ending cutscene that follows Harley's defeat is very well done, as it showcases how Harley has completely snapped, and displays Batman's fear of what happens to Robin before it's ultimately resolved. I know this DLC has its critics, and while it's not perfect, I do think it's a lot of fun. Next I have the Catwoman DLC from Arkham City. This is the first time we get to see events in the narrative of an Arkham game from the perspective of someone other than Batman, and I think this DLC has a lot to offer. I kinda like how Catwoman has her own separate story here, and you see little tidbits of the main story events affecting her narrative, although I will say that her episodes are kind of poorly placed in the main narrative itself. You actually start the game as Catwoman, which makes sense in light of the story, but is still a little weird. Then all of her subsequent episodes come right after something huge happens in the main story that just grinds the story to a halt and cuts to something completely unrelated, like when Joker is first revealed to Batman, or when Talia appears and offers Joker immortality. There are parts of Catwoman's separate narrative that I do like though. You get to see what Ivy's been up to since the events of Arkham Asylum, which I thought was pretty cool. Catwoman's rivalry with Two-Face, however, leaves a bit to be desired. While it was handled well enough in the beginning of the game with her first mission and the courthouse rescue, and the conflict was wrapped up relatively nicely, it was kind of just brought back at the end of the game out of nowhere. After Catwoman saves Batman during Protocol 10, it kind of felt like her story in the game ended and the devs didn't really know what to do with her and just used this rivalry to act as an epilogue to the game after it had already concluded. I will say that I really like both the narrative and gameplay structure of her third episode, as she sneaks into the Tiger Vault, swipes the vault keys from guards, tells Ivy to shove it, and is faced with a choice on whether or not to save Batman, and the really cool alternate ending you get if you choose not to save him. Another aspect I really like of Catwoman's inclusion in this game is that she actually has her own unique dialogue with different villains that Batman apprehends throughout the game, and you can actually use the character in free roam, and it's crazy to think that this is the only time in the Arkhamverse that Rocksteady or WB Montreal ever included other characters in free roam, so that's definitely something to note. As an extension of that, Catwoman also has her own Riddler trophies and unique challenges, which the devs didn't have to do, but I think it's really cool that they did. While this DLC story does have its problems, I think it's pretty good overall, and it's one of the better ones in the series. Kicking off the top 3, I have Shadow War. This is the Ra's al Ghul Season of Infamy mission from Arkham Knight. This is definitely the Season of Infamy mission that I was looking forward to the most, and certainly the one that left the biggest impact on me. We get to see this broken, weary version of Ra's al Ghul, even more so than he typically is before entering the Lazarus Pit. We're given 2 new locations in the small Lazarus Chamber on Bleak Island and the Elliott Memorial Hospital, the latter of which has a really gothic, eerie vibe similar to the medical facility in Arkham Asylum, and is also littered with numerous Easter eggs. There is also a civil war amongst the League of Assassins where we see a lot of rebels led by Ra's al Ghul's other daughter, Nyssa Ratko, which was a pretty cool character to see, as Nyssa had gotten a lot more popular due to her role in Arrow. Her role in the Arkhamverse was short-lived regardless of the path chosen, but it was nice to see her nonetheless. I am slightly disappointed we never got an appearance from Talia, who, despite dying in the climax of Arkham City, was heavily theorized and basically confirmed to have been revived from the events of that game alongside her father. We do get treated to an interview tape where Ra's is seemingly addressing Talia, although we never hear her voice, and there are multiple clues that heavily hint toward her survival. On the gameplay side, this DLC mainly features your typical strategy that you used against ninjas in the previous games, but also introduces one of the coolest gameplay aspects of the series, where a ninja will unleash a flurry of attacks on Batman that forces him to counter all of them, one after the other in quick succession, and the Rocksteady devs have dubbed this move the Fury Attack. The most interesting part of this DLC for me, though, is the final choice deciding Ra's al Ghul's fate that is left up to the player. You can revive Ra's with the Lazarus sample, which leads to him killing Nyssa, having a brief combat encounter with Batman, before vanishing in a puff of smoke, never to be seen again. On the other hand, you can choose to destroy the Lazarus machine, which leaves Ra's weakened. Nyssa assumes control of the League and leaves Gotham, with Batman bringing Ra's al Ghul to GCPD, where he will presumably die, although we do not see it. Just the fact that this DLC introduces this choice that can conflict with the player's own morality was really unique and interesting, as this had rarely been done before, aside from the Heir to the Cow mission as well as the Arkham City Catwoman DLC, but even then, the bad ending is rewound if you chose to do it. Overall, while this mission left some things to be desired, I was certainly very happy with it. For our runner-up, I have A Matter of Family. This is the Batgirl DLC story from Arkham Knight that showcases Barbara Gordon's days as Batgirl before her paralysis at the hands of the Joker, and I absolutely love this DLC. The new locations it introduces are visually unique from the rest of the Arkhamverse, the story is well structured, and the stakes are established right away. Batgirl's dialogue is a lot of fun, and her costume is probably the best that Batgirl has ever looked in a video game. Speaking of costumes, I think it's really cool that we finally get to see the Arkham Harley rocking her classic red, white, and black outfit. While the location that this DLC takes place in is smaller than others, I do at least like that you can free roam in it after the story ends. And, like with Elliott Memorial Hospital, there's a good amount of Easter eggs to be found here. From a gameplay standpoint, while Batgirl is slightly derivative of Batman, I think she's still a lot of fun to play as with her own unique animations, and her smaller amount of gadgets enables the player to approach combat and predator scenarios in a slightly different way. The dual play sections with Robin are pretty fun as well and provides an experience that makes it different from the dual play with Robin and Batman. The one issue that I have with this DLC that I just can't let go is the fact that Tim Drake is Robin. It doesn't help with the fact that I'm already not a fan of the Tim Drake-Barbara Gordon relationship, which is pretty prominent in the main game, but from a narrative standpoint, it simply doesn't make any sense that Tim Drake is Robin, since this DLC is set before Arkham Asylum in the timeline, and Tim Drake's Robin was not only not present in that game, but Batman was a solo act with Jason having recently died, and even Joker making a mention of Batman's sidekick being gone. Also, Joker's completely caught off guard by the appearance of the new Robin when he meets him in the Arkham City challenge maps. Now if the Robin in this DLC was Dick Grayson, which would make sense for the timeline as this is between Origins and Asylum, and Babs and Grayson have a much better dynamic in my opinion, it might have had a shot at being number 1 on this list. And even though I absolutely love this DLC, there's that one glaring issue that prevents it from being perfect. And in first place, I have the Cold Cold Heart from Arkham Origins. This DLC takes everything that people love about the character of Mr. Freeze, as well as the Heart of Ice episode from the animated series, and puts it into a video game. I love how the character is written here, and his dynamic with Batman is great, as you can tell that Batman sympathizes with him, but also can't let him commit numerous crimes. Ferris Boyle is also very well written as a despicable evil villain that really makes you want him to get what's coming to him. The locations in this DLC are all pretty cool, and you actually get to see more of Wayne Manor in this DLC, and this is actually the most you get to see of Wayne Manor in the Arkhamverse, and getting to explore it, as Bruce Wayne nonetheless, is pretty fun. I also like the small mention from Alfred of Bane's attack on Wayne Manor that took place in the main game, and you can still see bits of the damage that he inflicted on the Batcave. The XE suit that's brought in for this DLC is also pretty sick, and really fits the situation that Batman is placed in. Exploring Gothcore is pretty fun as well, and it has a good amount of Easter eggs, and the section where Batman pieces together what happened to Victor and Nora was really well written, and I just love that moment so much. The final boss fight against Mr. Freeze is slightly derivative of his boss fight in Arkham City, but it's still pretty fun and even has some new elements added to it. While the side missions in this DLC aren't necessarily groundbreaking, they're still pretty fun and make the surrounding world feel much more alive. Overall, this is definitely my favorite DLC story in the Arkhamverse, and I always have a ton of fun whenever I replay it. And that will bring the video to an end. This was my ranking of every DLC story in the Arkham series. But now for the best part, what do you guys think? How would you rank all the DLC stories in the Batman Arkham series? Also, in the comments below, tell me what part of the Arkham series you'd like to see me rank next. If you enjoyed the video, throw your batarangs at the like button, glide down to the comments and leave your thoughts, share this video with your Bat family, turn on your Bat signal so you're notified about future videos, and Bat punch that subscribe button if you want to see more. Peace out, Gothamites.